Charlie Kirk's murderer had a plan. He had a high-powered rifle. He had an elevated position over the venue. He had a 200-yard shot that was makeable. And he had an escape plan. And it seems like he had transportation and maybe even a safe house. All the pieces of his plan came into place, and he murdered Charlie Kirk. Now, there's one thing that he forgot. One thing that he forgot in his whole plan, and it wasn't that law enforcement would be able to track him through his phone. It wasn't that there was family members who would turn him in. It wasn't that he had left digital footprints all over the internet and could be traced. That wasn't the thing that he forgot. The one thing that Charlie Kirk's murderer forgot was that the tomb of Christ is empty. The tomb of Jesus of Nazareth is empty. And he didn't take that into account. He made the mistake of setting out to murder someone and not realizing that Christ is risen from the dead. And because that's true, it changes everything. It changes everything when it comes to the murder or the death of anyone. He forgot that fact, that the tomb is empty and we can't make the same mistake. The resurrection of Christ says, regardless how it looks, evil does not win. Regardless of how it seems, evil has been defeated. Regardless of how it looks, death has been killed. Death is dead, and it was done and slaughtered and brought to nothing by Jesus Christ. And because that's true, everything is going to end well. Now, is it okay to mourn in the light of the empty tomb? I put it to you, it is okay to mourn. We should mourn the death of the innocent or of a loved one. Death is not a part of life. It's not the way life is meant to be. So we're allowed to mourn death. Even Jesus, in the face of Lazarus' tomb, was weeping when he was just about to raise him from the dead. He's crying, connecting with the grief and the pain of the loved ones. And of course, he loved Lazarus. He didn't want to be separated from him for a minute. So it's okay to mourn in the face of death, but we don't mourn as this world mourns. We don't mourn as the rest of the unbelievers mourn, as if we do not have hope. Hope being a sure expectation of good. We have that in the face of death, anyone's death, because Jesus beat death and his tomb remains empty. So we know the good is coming to us and all of those who have died in Christ. And so Christ, through Paul, says, do not mourn as the world mourns without hope. Christ has solved the death problem. Resurrection is coming. Everything is going to end well. through Jesus, through Christ, because he's the one that's beat death. We were seeking to plant a church in Putnam, Connecticut. We rented a room in a hotel there for a number of years, and we met on Sunday evenings because we worshipped in Southbridge Sunday morning. And we had some brothers come over from Southbridge. We had some drive over an hour each way to come and worship with us from Rhode Island and their families. The hotel was owned by a Hindu man. His name was Kirty. And Kirti Patel, I remember his second name too, because Patel Steel was a big name, Indian steel manufacturer. But Kirti was very kind to us, very, very kind to us as we met at the hotel. And of course, we reached out to him with the gospel of Christ. And he was kind and warm enough, but always rebuffed us, when we were engaging him on the gospel. But one time before we worshipped, I think it was before we worshipped, we got to the building early, and I ended up alone with Kirty. And I'm not sure how we got onto his life and his family. I think it was how he ended up in the in the Northeast. But he started to share with me that his mother had died. And I asked him, tell me about the Hindu belief when it comes to death, Kirty. And he said, well, we believe in reincarnation. We believe in the circle of life. We believe that everyone will come back in some different form. I said, will you ever see your mother again? And he started to whelm up and started crying. He's like, no, I'll never see her again. And he said, what I said to her on her deathbed is, as she was dying, I want to be reincarnated as your son again. As your son. Huh. I said to Kirty, would you be open to the idea that through Jesus of Nazareth, death is being defeated and you could hold your mother again in your arms, that she will be raised from the dead, that she will put her arms around you, you'll put your arms around her, and you will embrace her again and be together. And he stood there and listened, and I could see in the man's eyes, that's wonderful. That would be it. But then he started shaking in his head, and he's just, no, that's just not the way it works. It's like, Kirty, it is. It is. It is. Because Jesus has beat death. For Kirty, it was too hard. It was too good a news at that point in his life to believe it. Maybe he's rethought the truth. We're not sure. Maybe someday he'll wake up to that truth. The resurrection is what Christ, the good news that Christ brought into the world for him to hear and for all men. See, we've watered down the good news, the gospel in this country. We've made Christianity into having a nice life, into being a nice person, into 2 or 3 times a week hanging around at a church building with a group of nice people and going to a nice place for eternity when you die. That is not the gospel. That is not the good news. No wonder people are rejecting this nice nonsense. We've a world of people broken-hearted over dead loved ones. They're facing death themselves, and preachers are offering them nice. Have we lost our minds? Jesus says this. Do not marvel at this, talking to the Jews, for the hour is coming which all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come forth, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. That's John 5:28 through 29. Jesus says this is not about being nice. It's about resurrection. It's about beating death. It's about overcoming the grave itself. He says he's going to raise them all from the dead. Been following this Charlie Kirk thing, as you probably have as well. I'm sick of seeing pictures on what used to be Twitter of white clothing and this guy in heaven with a few named preachers who just died recently, and clouds and pearly gates and that kind of stuff. And maybe there is something there, but that's not our message. Our message is resurrection, that he'll come out of the grave again someday, embodied, physically rise from the dead as Christ rose from the dead. That's our message, that death is being conquered and immortality has been brought to light by Jesus Christ. A physical resurrection, a literal resurrection, an embodied resurrection, and a new heaven and earth. And at that time, there's going to be the greatest reunion of loved ones this universe has ever seen. You know, Charlie Kirk's wife and kids are going to get to hold him again. Get to hold him again. They're going to be able to hug him again. They're going to be able to eat with him again. That's the gospel. That's the light in the darkness. And that's the hope for mankind. What a message we have. What a truth we have to share. That death has been defeated by Christ. In Acts 17, Paul went into the Areopagus in Greece. This is where the greatest minds, the greatest intellects amongst the Greeks and all the foreigners came together to share all their philosophies and their religion and their ideas, the atheists, the agnostics, the pagans, the Epicureans, all the philosophers. They all came together because that was the hot spot for the real truths of life and the ideas. And their motto at the Areopagus was this: there is no resurrection of the dead. That was the motto that they had, probably inscribed on the stones. There's no resurrection of the dead. Paul comes in. He sees that there is no resurrection of the dead. You guys believe that? You believe that? And they're all like, yeah. He says, oh, you got it wrong. You got it wrong. Do I have a message for you? I've got a message for you. And he preached the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ. And the result of it, they laughed at him. And what did Paul do? Well, he changed the message because he's trying to grow a church, right? He said, well, resurrection, what does it really mean? That could mean whatever it means to you, however you interpret it. No, he didn't do that. Did he offer them something else? Well, I'll do healings and show you powerful events and then you believe in me. Did not once do that. He went on his way and he preached the good news of the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ to everyone else that would hear him. See, the resurrection is the message of the Christ. He says he's going to raise all men from the dead, and he proved that he can do it because he rose from the dead himself. And the apostles went out and they preached, be a nice person and go to church 3 times a week. Right? No, they didn't. They went out and they preached the rapture, the end times, baptism. They went into the town and he said, let me tell you all about baptism. Right? No, they didn't. They didn't preach their eschatology, their soteriology, or their ecclesiology. They didn't talk about their church. They went out and they preached that Jesus of Nazareth's tomb is empty. He's risen from the dead. That was their message. They didn't compromise it, and we're not going to compromise it either. It's our message. And what a message it is. What a message it is. That death is being defeated. We proclaim the good news as they proclaim the good news. The tomb's still empty. Christ has destroyed death, and immortality has been brought to life. I remember a conversation with Beth and Ann. I can't remember when it was. You're in the spotlight, Beth, now. Fame at last. And she said to me this: we're surrounded by death. It's always in the background. It's always in the background. And the question is, how do we handle it? And I think the conclusion was, we're going with Jesus on this one. We're going to go with Jesus when it comes to death. Because nobody else has beaten death except for him. You can line them up. Muhammad's in his grave. Buddha's in his grave. Krishna's in his grave. Stalin's in his grave. Hitler's in his grave. Churchill's in his grave. Line them up. Bill Gates, he'll be in his grave. Donald Trump, he's going to be in his grave too. We're not going with any of those people when it comes to death. We're going with the only one who's not in his grave, Jesus of Nazareth. We're going with him. Goodness sake, it's not rocket science. Even I can understand it. The resurrection is the good news for mankind, and we don't apologize for its preaching because it's the truth. Doesn't matter who believes the resurrection's coming, it's going to happen. Doesn't matter if I can understand it, doesn't matter if I can explain it, describe it to you. All men are going to rise physically and literally and historically from the dead because Jesus did. And he says he's going to do that. We're going to believe Jesus on this one. See, Charlie Kirk's murderer had a plan. He had his high-powered rifle. He had a high position overlooking the venue. He had a 200-yard, reasonably easy shot. He had an escape plan, and he had transportation lined up, and all the pieces came into place. But he forgot one thing, and it wasn't the law enforcement would be seeking him and tracking him down. The one thing Charlie Kirk's murderer forgot, and those wicked people who mock his murder, they forgot something. They forgot that the tomb is still empty, that Christ is risen. And we can't make the same mistake. Christ gave us the supper to bring us back to his death on the cross, to bring us back to his burial, to bring us back to his empty tomb, to bring us back to a physical and literal and historical resurrection from the dead. The bread speaks to us of his physical body that the apostles put their hands on when he physically rose from the dead. That's what this bread speaks about. that the body that was nailed to the cross, he rose from the dead and they put their hands on him. And it speaks to us of our resurrection body, that someday, if we have to go through the death process, we're physically coming out of the grave. But I'll tell you this, some generation has to be alive when he comes. I hope it's me. I hope it's me. But we have loved ones who have died and we miss and we long for. This bread speaks to us of putting our hands on them again, of holding them again, of them holding us. As you put your hands on this physical bread, we're brought back to the physical resurrection, and we're reminded of ours, and we're reminded of all men. At this supper, we're to wake up again, and it's time to wake up. In light of all that has occurred this past week, Christ has given us this time to wake up to the good news, the best news, the hard to believe but true news that he is risen from the dead. And because he's risen from the dead, he's going to raise all men from the dead, including all of our loved ones. And we're going to be united again with all of those who have gone before us. This is the light in the darkness. That's the good news for all mankind. That's the gospel of the resurrected Christ.